welcome back to the Mental Health Podcast, where we talk about pop culture, social issues, and politics through a mostly strictly mental health lens. I am human and I am subject to bias just like anyone else. Today I wanted to talk about something that may or may not be a popular subject. We're going to talk a little bit about faith and religion and its value that I'm seeing in mental health. And I think it's a valuable topic to discuss, especially kind of right now, just given that it's, I'm out here in Portland and atheism's on the rise, and that's not a negative statement from me at all. Like, I don't have a problem with secularism kind of, becoming more and more acceptable. There's a lot of people from that way of thinking that I have a lot of respect for, like Sam Harris, for instance. I think it frees some people up to really just kind of explore things in different ways and maybe ways that I hadn't thought of. Also, I never really counted myself as a very religious person, and I'm not sure I still, even today, would kind of necessarily describe myself that way. I'm not the type of person who would go around really, if people asked me, like, what are the three things you most identify with, I don't think Christianity would be necessarily in that list. And growing up, I was always brought to church, but I went through a pretty long period where I just became kind of disillusioned with it. That sort of typical teenage developmental period where I'm kind of branching off from where my parents are at and trying to figure things out for myself. And, again, with my brain being underdeveloped, because, again, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for more abstract thinking and impulse control and all that, isn't developed till you're 25. I've kind of jumped the gun, like a lot of young people do, once you start hearing people talk about, the horrors of what religion has done in the past. And make no mistake, plenty of horrible, heinous things have been done in the name of religion, and so I don't want to take away from that fact. I'm not here to preach and tell you that religion is the best thing since sliced bread and it's completely beyond reproach and anything that's been done in its name is for the positive. Absolutely not. I've been learning a lot more about kind of how supposedly people are kind of misunderstanding the Crusades, but even taking that out of the mix, like, a lot of death there, a lot of carnage, a lot of enslavement and bad things, bad stuff going on in the name of religion, no doubt. And then even today, you've got groups like the Westboro Baptist Church with the God hates fag signs. That's no way to go about your day. And I'm going to kind of get more into that. Now, all that said, I still think that there is a lot of value to having some sort of faith, whatever that may be. And I'm not specifically talking about Christianity, but that's just my background, so that's more so the point of view I'm going to be talking from. But in any case, there's plenty of research out there just showing that there is an added benefit to being a part of a church community. It makes sense on a number of different levels, but people will report better mental health outcomes, and that tends to be associated with some sort of faith that they follow and that they have a very strong belief in. And I was sort of inspired. I've been thinking about how I want to talk about this for a couple months now, actually, and I just hadn't really landed on a specific way that just felt right. And I was actually sitting in church today, and we just started going back. We've kind of been in and out. Again, I haven't been like a devout follower from about late high school through college, through my master's program. There was probably a good, maybe 10 years stretch where I didn't go at all. And then we found this fabulous church in Memphis that really welcomed us and just felt right and ended up being really great for, of all people, my oldest daughter just kept begging us to go because she hadn't really experienced it and was so happy to be there. So we did that, but then we uprooted to Portland, and then there was another probably 2-year or so gap before we started up at the church we have here, and we're very happy with this one. And I'm particularly finding myself just very fulfilled every Sunday just listening to the pastor speak. And I'll level with you, I really don't like church music, so And it's the more modern, like they've got a band and they're very talented. They got a lot of good musicians and people get into it. It's just not my scene. I mean, some of you may know, I've talked about it before. Those of you who are coming here from the other channel, I'm a metalhead. Like I am all about just listening to really intense, heavy music, and also, some rock, some alternative, some rap, whatever. But just that kind of easy listening Christian music just isn't really up my alley. That said, again, like I really like the sermons. I get a lot out of it. To me, it's almost like going to a really profound TED Talk every week that has obviously a very religious slant to it. And it sort of gives me a challenge each week to kind of have something to work on, something to work towards, something I'm trying to look at in myself to, become better, and also not push a religious message to others, but just send kind of those same positive vibes from that message to other people to help them be better as well. And that may be at work, it may be at home, whatever. But this week he was talking a lot about the concept of praying with joy, and how we often just get bogged down in just the negative and how bad things can be. And he used a couple of different parallels. He had this really funny story where he showed a picture of this guy's hotel he was going to stay at when he was on vacation, and it looked like it had this amazing pool and right in the back. And then they had a picture of what it really was, and it was like this little tiny, almost like hot tub sized pool that only went up to his waist, and they had just done a good job of shooting the pool with the camera in such a way that it looked much more impressive than it really was. And he was like, do you think that he felt joy when he saw that? And it's just the idea of, even in those hard times, even when you're finding yourself, in those moments where you could be disappointed, finding a way to just think about it differently. And he quoted a verse from Paul's time when he was imprisoned, and I'm not a big Bible reader, but I liked this verse, and it said, "What has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel." And that really struck me deep, because we're in a time right now, and maybe it's always been this way, and I'm just old enough to kind of notice it now, but people are just so hung up on the negative, and you especially see this put up to a megaphone when it comes to things like Twitter and whatnot. Everyone's talking about who has things better than them, and this latest horrible thing that went down, and how sorry they feel for themselves. And it really is just toxic, because it's not productive. I mean, we talk about needing a space to vent, and maybe sometimes there's value in that, but I think for the most part we just get stuck in that. And it particularly really stung me because it resonated, because it made me think about something I've mentioned on the podcast before, that I've experienced the loss of a child. My wife and I got to 8 months with our unborn child, and she ended up passing away, and we delivered her stillbirth. And that, to this, is the hardest thing that I've ever had to deal with. And it's still raw. It's still hard to think about. I don't think I'll ever be the person I was before that happened. But that said, I think what really got me through that time was thinking in this way. And what's kind of occurred to me about religion is, I think people who get really mad about religion tend to see it the wrong way. I've seen memes even where they're kind of bashing on it from the perspective of, well, religion says everything happens for a reason, and, everything's chaos, and some things don't happen for a reason. And I think that's kind of a misunderstanding of what religion really is. And I think even religious people get that wrong too. It's something I really value, again, about this particular church that we go to, and the sermons that our pastor gives are not in line with that. In fact, he recently gave us a sermon on, like, sometimes life's going to let you down. Like, sometimes stuff's just going to happen, and it's going to be bad. And you could be the best person in the world. You could be the most religious. You could give the most to your church out of anyone. You could be the most involved in groups and your community, and bad stuff can still happen. I mean, it's kind of like the story of Saul. One of the finest people described in the Bible, and then he just gets completely crapped on, basically, and all this bad stuff happens, but he finds a way through it all to keep his faith and maintain a positive perspective. So for me, religion isn't so much about things just happening for a reason. It's all about providing a framework for us to bring meaning to all things. I want to say that one more time. Religion isn't so much about things happening for a reason. It's about providing us a framework to bring meaning to all things. So when I lost my child, for instance, part of the comfort was that I'm not being punished. This isn't some big cosmic joke on me. This isn't in response to something bad that I did. I considered myself among that group of like pretty good people. Like God knows, we all do things that aren't great 100% of the time. But I mean, I've devoted my life and my career to working with kids and trying to help them get better and be better and work through their trauma and live productive lives. And then here this awful thing happens to my own child. And it's easy to be left wondering why. And I think I see a lot of people do that. Why, God? Why me? And people will even abandon faith because of that, because they feel so betrayed. But for me, I had that initial moment of why, and what I landed on was there is no why. It just is, and it's up to me to decide what the meaning of this is. How am I going to bring meaning to this event and use it to move forward and better myself and rally around the people around me and have an even more productive future? And that's a very kind of cognitive therapy, just a way of looking at things. And I think I just tend to go there. And I think that is kind of woven into faith and religion. It's partially just this self-cognitive therapy. It's the idea of kind of keeping your glass full all the time and how that benefits you and others. Because we're all sitting here with a certain amount of water in our glass, and some people have more and some people have less. But imagine if you could just wake up every day and walk through that day being so thankful for the water that you have in that glass and figuring out all the benefits you can get out of that amount of water, and even how can you fill that water up just a little bit more. So it's a very CBT or CT kind of way of walking through life. And I could probably talk all day about examples of, working with kids who really struggled with that, who part of their main problem wasn't just that they had come out of this awful trauma. But again, what trauma does to you is it kind of robs you of a sense of positivity. It makes sense that you're kind of always locked in this, woe is me, everything is terrible, I don't have a future, everyone hates me, nobody cares about me, people think I'm a bad person, and you're just locked in this mindset. And therapy is great for that. And I think faith is also great for that. And I've seen that with people I've worked with there's been kids I've worked with who had a pretty strong faith, and that was a huge protective factor. And in fact, it's been shown it's an evidence-based protective factor, and it's something that we do try to pull on, because some people respond really well to therapy, but some people respond better to pastoral counseling or just getting involved in a church community. And I've seen that happen where I had kids in residential where I'd connect with the clergy person that would come in and speak with them, and that ended up being a much stronger driving force for them to get better than working with me. And that didn't hurt my feelings. I'm like, hey, anything that's going to help this kid do better in the future. And then we have kids in the community too, where we get them involved in a church, or they're already involved, and we just see the joy that it brings them and the help. And so I think there's that cognitive aspect where it helps you think more positively, and you're able to constantly remember, like, I have people that care about me, and I have things that I'm looking forward to. I do feel like there's a path for me. And then on top of that, it provides a great social community, which is awesome for attachment experiences. We as humans are social creatures, and it's so critical that we do engage with other people that care about us and that share interests and talk and provide physical contact in a positive way and all of that. And the church community, if you find the right one and you find a good fit, it can do all of that for you. So again, I want to stop and pause here and just again say, I'm not saying that you should go out and join a church right now. I'm just putting it out there why there are positive evidence-based reasons why faith and having a faith community can be a really positive thing for your life. And plenty of people do well without that. Again, looking at people like Sam Harris, he's a pretty happy guy, has his life pretty well put together, very intelligent, has a path set for himself, has goals, and engages with a lot of interesting people. You can totally be out there in the secular world and do that. And there's this other option too. And I just like to provide people with as many options as I can. But it's helped me so much too, especially of late. And again, I apply all these messages kind of, not literally, I'm not like going into work and preaching, but I'm just putting like the message up on the board. Like the other week we had a message about like, faith isn't about like rising up people to your level, so to speak. It's really about getting down in the mud and doing the work where it needs to be done. That applied very much to me, and I tried to apply that kind of to the counselors I was working with, because sometimes it's easy for counselors, especially newer counselors, to get really frustrated with the caregivers that we work with, because they make bad decisions and they don't always treat their kids well, and they're not always nice to us, and so it's really easy to just get irate and upset with them and kind of expect them to rise to the occasion and mature up to work with us on a professional level. But guess what? It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen that way. And I had to learn that really quick in order to, if I really wanted to benefit these families and these kids, I had to really roll around in the mud with these families and just get down to where they were at, because that's where they were in the world and there was no other place to meet them, and figure out how was I going to work from that starting point and navigate all of us together to a better place. And I think that's where most relationships happen. People are losing sight of that. People just like to, it's so much easier to just get mad at people and just cast them out into this other category and say, I'm right, you're wrong. Until you rise to the occasion and rise to my level, nothing's going to change. But really, it's the opposite of that. If you want to see real change and see society move in a better direction, you have to get down and roll around in the mud. And again, people are probably sick of me bringing him up, but like the one person, I'm a big no heroes person right now is my mantra, because people will let you down. Look at, you, especially celebrities. People idolized R. Kelly, and he's a fantastic singer, and same with Michael Jackson, and look at what's happening. Even the most talented people that we may at one point look up to are capable of letting you down. But if there's one person that I still have been elevating lately, it's Daryl Davis, because he's getting down in the mud with these KKK members and doing that real work to get on their level and figure out what makes them tick and help actually sway some of them over to a better life, one that doesn't involve discrimination and bigotry and hatred. He's doing it with love and with joy, I would argue, with a lot of joy. The pastor during the sermon, too, mentioned Martin Luther King when he was in Birmingham prison, and he wrote that famous letter, and he kind of compared him to Paul in that same situation. And Martin Luther King, and I've read the letters from Birmingham prison, but I didn't really pick up on this one point, because I've talked about it before, but he says something along the lines where he points out that, there's value in him being in that cell, because it allowed him the time to reflect and write and encourage others with the thoughts that came out. And so that's him, like that's the definition of being glass half full. You're in a jail cell, and instead of sitting there in misery thinking about, oh my God, my life is over and how awful is it to be in here and not be in my own bed with my own family, instead he's going, what can I get out of this? And what he can get out of this is, well, if I was out of here, I'd be running around doing all sorts of other stuff, and I wouldn't have time to just sit and think. So now I've been awarded this ultimate time of meditation and just sitting in silence, and it's the only thing I can do. And so now I can really work through some of these issues on a deeper level than maybe if I weren't here right now. There's something very beautiful and profound about that. Again, he would agree that verse, what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. Or you could even replace the gospel to, advance my community, advance society, advance my own self-maturity, whatever. You plug that in, and that's the way to maintain these, what we call helpful thoughts when we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, because there are helpful thoughts and unhelpful thoughts, and that's different from a thought being true or false. What defines a helpful versus an unhelpful thought is simply, does it make you feel good, and does it push you towards positive behaviors? That's it. Like, an unhelpful thought makes you miserable, and you get down in the dumps, and this is kind of a big part of depression, where you lose interest with things that you used to do, and you just kind of curl up in bed in misery. And I'm not saying that depression is just that, because there is a whole chemical aspect to it. People who are truly clinically depressed, and I've seen it, like literally cannot crawl themselves out. But a big part of getting better is being able to challenge those thoughts on top of all sorts of other factors that are more complex in that case. But suffice it to say that it is important to be able to monitor our thinking, which we call kind of metacognition, thinking about our own thoughts, and determining, am I having a helpful thought or an unhelpful thought right now? And if it's unhelpful, how am I going to change that? How can I gray things up? And it can be interesting how that can go down. It may be that you go from nobody loves me to, well, I know that, my mom loves me. She just called me the other day and told me. Or I can go out and join a community and find people that care about me. I have the power to do that. I can take an active role in that. Or there was a funny comic the other day I saw that I really liked, and I'm probably going to share it with work as an example for the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy we do for the cognitive triangle portion. But it had just 2 panels. And on the top, it had a guy looking really upset and down in the dumps, and he was saying, nobody fucking cares. And the bottom panel was a guy really happy with his arms up in the air, and it was the exact same words, and it just said, nobody fucking cares. And I was like, that's so great, because that's like cognitive therapy in a nutshell sometimes. Sometimes it's not changing the thought, it's just changing how you're viewing the thought. And it's so true, because you could look at it as glass half empty, where it's nobody cares about anything that I'm talking about. Or it could be glass half full of, I can say whatever I want and do whatever I want, and nobody cares, and nobody's going to stop me. Like, it's just a very different way of viewing the same situation. And that's classically where that glass half full, glass half empty thing comes from. It's the idea of 2 people sitting at a table staring at this glass of water, and one says, I have half a glass of water, and the other says, I'm missing half of my water. Same situation, same circumstances, but simply the way that they're viewing it is completely going to drive the different directions that they're going to move forward with that moment. So I'd just like to see a lot more of this in society. I was really happy to say, I'm a big fan of the Factual Feminist, and she tweeted out, even on Women's Day, and I'm sure she knew she was going to get chewed out for this like she always does, but on Women's Day, she called to the feminists, and she considers herself a feminist, but she said, I hate this new brand of like toxic feminism where it's teaching women that instead of empowering themselves and bettering themselves and fighting for positivity and gains and taking a more proactive, productive perspective where it's additive, where they're trying to improve things, her thinking on it was that it's shifted now where it's all about women are downtrodden and they've had their rights taken away and they can't do anything, and the patriarchy is holding them down, and we're victims. We're all professional victims walking through life. And her perspective on that, I think, is very much aligned with this same message, that's toxic, that has a lot of negative connotations, and it can disempower people is the unfortunate side of it. And again, that's not to say that some of those things might be true, and that's why we distinguish between helpful and unhelpful thoughts versus true and untrue thoughts. It may be that you're working in a job where genuinely men are preventing you from moving up in the ranks. That is a possibility. That is a thing that happens. So that could be a true thought. But is it helpful? is it driving you forwards, or is it just making you miserable and feel like a victim and feel like there's nothing you can do about it but complain? I agree with her in that I think it's better to take a more positive perspective of how good we have it. And part of how she did it in that tweet was she listed out statistically all of the ways in which women in America largely have it better than they ever have before, and largely better than any other country they could live in the world, and how far they've come, and was able to show, you can look at this, like there's great people out there who do TED Talks and stuff on this topic about how far we've come and how things are statistically better than they ever have been before. And again, that's not to say that there's not improvements to be made, that there's not injustice out there, but I agree, again, aligned with this message. How do we take where we're at, acknowledge the good, acknowledge the water that we have, and use that to propel us even farther forward instead of getting bogged down in the stagnation of misery and negativity? Now, capping this all off, I just want to say one more time, if someone is using their belief system to justify negative actions towards others, then they're doing it wrong. You can and should have thoughts and beliefs about all things. Like, I think it's perfectly fair for people in various religious communities to have different thoughts about anything from homosexuality to separation from church and state. Like, that's how we continue to progress, is to have these ideas out there in the open, in the public marketplace, and have those conversations, even if they can be uncomfortable and it's kind of upsetting. But when I will draw the line where, it's causing an actual repression of someone, like a real repression of somebody. But the purpose overall should be one of real benefit. And I think that for the most part, that's the case. There's this quote I also really like where it says, "Never attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity." Or I soften that and say ignorance. And I think largely that's true. I think most people out there have good intentions and they just lack the information, and they make decisions because they're in a bubble. And that's why I think these growing bubbles are such a bad thing, because it exacerbates that issue. But ultimately, I think most people do things because they think they have the right idea in mind. And so with that out there, I think the remedy is not to shut people down. It just reminds me of the whole Ellen Page rant on the Jimmy Kimmel Show or whatever that was, where she was calling out Mike Pence and telling him basically that he's actively been trying to hurt the LGBTQ plus community. And I was kind of like, that's not fair. Like, you don't know that. You don't know that for sure. And, could she be right? Sure. I don't know Mike Pence either. And I'm not I don't know a ton about him. I know some of his background, enough to know why she's saying these things, but I just think it's unfair. You can, again, talk about what he's doing and how it could be harmful. That's factual. That's fair. And how are we going to use that to propel forward? But I think simply calling it out and saying he's intentionally trying to do harm, you're not a mind reader. None of us are. We can't make those assumptions. You can't really fight hate with hate, as much as people seem to think that works. It really doesn't. I mean, look at the Nazis. Like, the Nazis developed this massive party and an army based on the idea of repression and actual harm towards others. Where are the Nazis now? Largely gone. Like, there's still comparatively tiny little sects out there of Nazis, but compared to what that was back, during World War II, forget about it. Like, hate failed. Hate failed in that situation, and it will continue to fail. What I would really like to see is more people like Ellen Page getting up there and taking that more additive stance on it, and being able to say that, like, here's what I see going on, and willing to give ground, like Daryl Davis does, to accept that, like, maybe this isn't based in hatred. Like, going and meeting with Mike Pence, just sitting down with him and saying, hey, this is what I see happening, and here's what I don't like about it. And maybe you could tell me a little bit more about what your perspective is here and what's happening. And so much good tends to come out of those conversations, because that would be something that both people could walk out of that room with new knowledge and new understanding, and maybe a new, maybe not friendship, but partnership at least, where they could work together on these issues. The more we divide, the more we separate, the more we lose these nuggets of information that we all like to know, act like we know it all. But we all kind of hold little individual pieces to the puzzle. And without us actually sitting down and communicating, especially with the people that we disagree with the most, we don't get anywhere. So again, my challenge to you walking out of this podcast, if you want something to kind of work on this week and really think about, mull over, and allow to sort of grow within you, is again this idea of, how am I going to take what has happened to me and make it serve to advance my gospel or my community or my family, myself, whatever. And potentially too going out and thinking differently about, like, how do I get involved with some sort of community that really fosters that in me. And maybe that is joining a church, or maybe it's something completely different. But I do think just having that community and those positive aspirations is just so important to the furtherment of our society. So I think that'll do it for now. As always, I'm going to leave you with the words of our wise sages, who are super positive and glass half full, and saying, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.